Well, good afternoon, folks. We're here to talk a little bit about the future, and we've already seen some of it. A remote control, self-driving beer cooler. Will wonders never cease? The timing of this session, delegates, could not really be better with the scheduled start this week of the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, and of course the Canada-European Trade Agreement starting this fall. So it's a little bit after lunch. You may have thought it's nap time. It's in fact NAFTA time. Sorry, they pay me to say this. Folks, more so now than ever, our cities are integrated into a global economy. There's no question that the impact of decisions that are made outside of Ontario have a deep impact on our local economies, and our communities have to respond. Now, we municipalities are always at the pragmatic end of global issues, from how climate change impacts the size of the culverts that we build through the economic development strategies that we implement as a result of trade agreements. So how do we as local councils make sense of this? How do we make wise decisions that respond to the economic climate that we're operating in a globally connected world? So with me today are three individuals representing the three largest sectors of Ontario's economy to provide insight into the critical things that we must be thinking about as municipalities, that we need to consider in the context of globalization as we act locally. We have Dennis Darby, the President and CEO of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association. We have Jamie Lim, the President of the Ontario Forest Industries Association, and Evan Fraser, who is Canada Research Chair in Global Food Security at the University of Guelph. Each are going to provide some brief remarks before we sit down to discuss those critical things that we need to think about locally. So please join with me in welcoming first Dennis Darby.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Well, hello and welcome. I'd like to thank the Association of Municipalities of Ontario for this opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. In many respects, manufacturing is what connects local economies in Ontario and to the global stage. So, there's some numbers on the chart there, but it's the only chart I'm going to use today, and you don't have to memorize any of the numbers. But just in Ontario, there are over 750,000 direct jobs and 1.25 million indirectly dependent jobs on the manufacturing sector. So manufacturing has the largest multiplier of any sector in the province. For every dollar invested, $3.50 in economic activity is generated. And there was almost $300 billion in manufacturing output last year in Ontario, more than $500 billion nationally. 75% of all of Ontario's exports are manufactured goods produced across the province. You know, we specialize in transportation, in natural resource upgrading, in food and drink processing, and sometimes we hit out of the park in the worlds of technology. But for the last, probably go back 200 years, our economy in Ontario has been deeply rooted in trade. And it continues to be the engine of the economy even today in 2017. Today, over 10% of our GDP is due to our strong manufacturing capabilities and the ability to export goods. And that's why we often say manufacturing matters. I'm not telling you anything new. As municipal leaders, you are the experts on the ways that manufacturing, related trade activity, and supply chains benefit communities. And I'm certain you have many ideas how we can do it even better. And that's one of the reasons I'm here today. And so you can see the positive effects of a strong manufacturing sector in your communities every day. And nowhere are the benefits held more deeply than in your industrial corridors, in your main streets, and at the end of the day at City Hall or your town hall. And our moderator mentioned it. No event has had a more fundamental effect on our economy than NAFTA. In 1984, it was proclaimed, and the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement in 1987 that preceded it. And for all that has been said about NAFTA, some of it sensational, and some part on the south part of the border, some of it too dry for words, I feel it's important to remember at the outset that NAFTA, as a trade agreement, isn't why we make things and why we engage in trade with our friends around the world. NAFTA is the how. It's the ways we build together, we compete with the world and each other, and innovate together. And it's important to communities. And while the original NAFTA disrupted many businesses who couldn't compete or didn't have the economies of scale to stay afloat in a huge market consisting of Canada, Mexico, and the US, the agreement has, on a macro level, been fundamentally positive for Canada. In my role as the president of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, I've been doing a lot of thinking and had a lot of discussions about NAFTA at this particular moment. So there appears to be general consensus, and in fact the minister mentioned it this morning in her speech, that NAFTA has to be updated and become a more living document, reflecting the changes to our society from technology to economics and recently even political ideologies. If you go back to 1987, when the historic Canada-US Free Trade Agreement was signed by Ronald Reagan and Brian Mulroney, which eventually led to NAFTA in 1994. But back then, in 1987, big hair and Calvin Klein jeans were in. George Michael and Whitney Houston were topping the charts. We were eating low fat, and the average house in Ontario cost $10,000. So from a business and technology point of view at that time, broadband was a concept in a lab in California. Fax machines were in every office, and many of us had these people working for us called secretaries. And we talked about the explosion of personal computers the way we speak today about artificial intelligence. Not quite sure if we're ready for it. So the world has changed. The world has changed considerably in the last 30 years, mostly as a result of staggering technological advances that have reshaped the way we work, the way we travel, the way we communicate, and the way apparently we get beer delivered to our cottage by remote control. Anyway, so the idea of amending NAFTA frightens many of our members. Let me be honest. Many of our companies are really fearful of what's going to happen. And many businesses across North America are also have much trepidation. And it may keep you up at night as well, because many of you have experienced how far away negotiations can affect people in your town, in your city. Canadian businesses have told us they're concerned about losing access to markets and the creation of barriers either by tariff or non-tariff means. And particularly, they worry about the U.S. administration's mixed signals on the whole area of trade. Will our largest neighbor to the south make changes that end up threatening the survival of businesses? But I believe we must embrace the change, and we see these imminent negotiations as an opportunity for Canada. Instead of being on the defensive, Canada and Canadian companies and all of us should insist on making changes that will ultimately deliver better results for us and for the economies of all three countries. The goal, of course, is stronger economic performance and improved global share for the North American market. And this is our chance to create a really North American market, which will give us, look forward to the next 30 years of prosperity. So, we're undoubtedly entering an era of change and of growth, and the opportunity at the community level will inevitably become the most important issue of this conversation. I have a few thoughts before we get into hear from my colleagues. To ensure the future prosperity of our communities and to keep manufacturing jobs here at home, we need to make sure that Ontario manufacturers have access to the tools they need to take advantage of the opportunities created by a new NAFTA, to attract investments and skilled people and to compete on the global stage. Reality is Ontario is not attracting enough investment from either domestic or international sources to maintain long-term competitiveness today. Given the importance of new technologies and machinery and equipment to manufacturing operations, the declining investment has led to corresponding declines in productivity rates compared with our major international competitors, including the US. As we are working with the provincial government to find solutions to the serious impediments to competitiveness in this province, such as attracting and retaining skilled workers, regulatory burdens, the cost and the reliability of energy supply, changes to the labor code, we turn to you to help us alleviate this. Now, you may think as a municipal official, you don't have much influence on these issues, but nothing could be further from the truth. I was the head of public affairs for Procter & Gamble for many years, and I interacted more with municipal governments than with all other levels of government. From building permits to infrastructure support to plant expansions, there was always a reason for us to be connecting with each other. Before manufacturers step into the global arena, much of their success has already been determined by how well they are working with you to build on the natural strengths of your communities. We recently polled our members and found that only 20% of them believe municipalities support investment, and only 3% believe the tax and regulatory system have improved over the last years. 60% of our members believe investment conditions are worsening. So these are perceptions we need to change, and these are real changes we're going to have to take on. So we'd like to use this opportunity here today as to start the dialogue about how municipalities and manufacturers can work hand in hand to do all we can to support, strengthen, and grow our communities. Thank you.
We're taking all your time.
That's all right. Don't worry.
I have to see where this is going to sit. Ladies and gentlemen, your worships, members of municipal government, delegates, for over 150 years, forestry has played a pivotal role in building our province. Ontario's forest sector is deeply rooted in every region, every main street of Ontario, supporting over 170,000 hardworking people. For generations, OFIA's members have been growing local economies by harvesting and planting trees. The forest sector has been putting Ontario's wood to work responsibly and sustainably. And it's been our sector's ability to adapt and to innovate, and yes, to compete in today's global marketplace that has allowed us to survive 2 world wars, a Great Depression, and the recent recession. So can forestry be Ontario's greatest opportunity? You bet. Absolutely. And there's 2 reasons. First, the world wants wood. Wood is experiencing a renaissance. Today, architects, engineers are choosing to build with wood, tall wood buildings. We're very proud that Canada right now holds the title for the tallest wood building in the world, 18 stories. That's innovation. Couple that with the bioeconomy, and this is our time. And smart consumers can choose Ontario's forest products with confidence, knowing that our sector operates under one of the world's most rigorous environmental regulations. Our forests are regenerated after harvest, and practices must maintain the long-term health of the forest. It is the law. Second, trees grow. At a NOMA convention, former Minister Glenn Murray commented, and I quote, "Actually solving an environmental crisis, climate change, may create amazing economic opportunity for much more wide use of forest products." He's right. So how do we work together to ensure Ontario benefits from our renewable resource? It's going to take 4 measures. First, I know this is shocking, we need wood to run our mills. We need reliable, consistent access to affordable wood supply. Wood that has been allocated for industrial purposes needs to stay allocated. So when will Ontario harvest its last tree? Ontario is blessed with an abundance of healthy forests. Our sector harvests less than half of 1% annually. That tiny little blue dot that you see on the infographic up behind me. We harvest so little, but the benefits are so great. 57,000 direct jobs and $15.5 billion in economic activity. To put this in perspective, Ontario is 3 times bigger than Finland. And in 2013, Finland harvested 65 million cubic meters of wood. Same year, Ontario harvested just 13.5 billion cubic meters. So think about this. Ontario is 3 times bigger, but harvests 80% less than Finland. Finland has developed a national forestry strategy with a goal of increasing their harvesting to 80 million cubic meters by 2025. In Ontario, there is no strategy to grow our renewable resource. Quite the opposite. New provincial policy threatens to shrink Ontario's wood supply. That represents missed opportunity for our main streets. And just this morning, Minister McGarry met with myself and some of the mayors that we work closely with, and I think she's recognizing that we've got to change the direction we're moving in, and we're grateful for that. The second measure is Ontario's public policy. It has to provide business certainty, and it has to be developed hand in hand with practitioners and affected stakeholders, you. And if government's policy creates uncertainty, and it creates a system that becomes unworkable, it will end investment in Ontario's renewable resource. This is why OFIA works so closely with our municipal leaders, because we know the awesome potential of this sector, and we want to do everything we can to grow it, not just for now, but for future generations. Thirdly, we need customers, and we need anti-forestry groups, full-time panic merchants, to stop harassing our customers and spreading misinformation, fake news. These special interest groups want you to think that harvesting destroys forests and causes deforestation. This just isn't true. They want you to think that using that little blue dot is still too much. And they're willing to go to lengths, ladies and gentlemen, that you and I can't even dream of. In December 2014, Greenpeace was targeting Best Buy and pressuring them to stop buying paper from Canada's boreal forest. Greenpeace sent a cyber alert, that's actually what it was called, to their volunteers, asking them, and I quote, to write a false product review on Best Buy's website, be creative, and make sure to weave in the campaign issues. Well, I don't know about you, but if I sent an email out to stakeholders asking them to lie, I'd be looking for a new job. We appreciate MNRF's activity and actively meeting with our customers to counter all of this misinformation. And mayors are standing up to these professional bullies and saying enough. Fake news should never be allowed to threaten the livelihood of hardworking men and women in Ontario. And lastly, we need a softwood lumber outcome that works for all of Canada, not just BC. Our sector is highly integrated, so a bad softwood lumber deal impacts the whole sector, not just sawmills. This is the 5th round in a 35-year history of U.S. lumber disputes. The U.S. alleges our lumber is subsidized. They impose punishing unlawful duties. Canada appeals. The U.S. loses, and the unlawful duties never survive. But, and here's the big but, the final result has always been the same. Bad negotiated settlements to the detriment of Ontario companies, workers, and communities. After 35 years, let's not repeat history. This time, we need a deal that keeps people working in Kenora, Thunder Bay, Hearst, Timmins, Pembroke, you get the idea. In closing, with these 4 measures in place, Ontario's forest sector can compete globally and can continue to support Ontario's main streets. And remember, people matter, jobs matter, main streets matter. Thank you.
Thank you, honored guests, the Mayor, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to speak. Just as a reminder, I'm Evan Fraser, and I direct something called the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph. And I've really been asked to talk to you today about agriculture, what's shaping it, how it may affect our economy, and I have 3 basic messages that, if you're sort of paying attention, you might want to tick off. The first is that I am completely convinced that agriculture is going to grow in terms of its overall importance in the economy over the next generation. My second message is that agriculture and ag food in general is really on the cusp of some massive transformative changes in terms of technology and processes. And my final message is that there's a contradiction between an impulse towards greater global trade in agriculture, but also greater localization. And I think municipalities in particular can play a role in helping us navigate this tension. So let me go to these 3 topics in turn and start with the fact that agriculture is sort of a growing concern in terms of the economy. I mean, the macroeconomic conditions and trends are uncontrovertible. Population growth set to go from its current level at about 7 billion up to 9 or 10 billion later this century. Rising affluence in Asia mean that not only are there more of us, but we're richer and we're demanding more resource-intensive diets, and in particular livestock. At the same time, that sort of list of 21st century nightmares, climate change, volatile energy prices, water scarcity, soil erosion, all these things are real and likely to make it harder and more expensive to produce food. So at the macro level, we see challenges both in terms of rising demand but also maintaining supply. And this means that agriculture and food will rise in terms of its economic importance. But this is a challenge at a global level, no question at all. But it also represents a huge opportunity, and an opportunity that I think Canada and Canadian communities in particular are poised to seize. We have abundant fresh water, we have abundant land, a relatively small population, sophisticated infrastructure, and an educated workforce. All these factors point towards a conclusion that we can become a global food superpowerhouse. And this opportunity has been recognized recently by the federal government. In February, Minister Morneau accepted a report from the Advisory Council for Economic Growth that presented a plan for how to increase middle-class incomes. And in that report, they defined agriculture and ag food as one of the key engines for economic growth over the next century. The Advisory Council recommended, in particular, that the federal government should try to double our ag food exports over the next 15 years and strive to become, quote, the world's trusted supplier of safe, sustainable food. So, point one, agriculture is growing and it's an opportunity. Point two, agriculture is about to face some massively disruptive changes. The same technologies that brought us the internet and are now being applied to medicine and transportation are just beginning to inch their way onto our farms and our feedlots. Imagine, if you will, smart tractors that know where they are in a field and plant the right seed in the right place and give it the right amount of fertilizer. Imagine sensors that track farm animals in real time, improving both well-being and efficiency while reducing inputs and antibiotic use. Imagine DNA barcoding to identify food fraud, foodborne ailments, and invasive pests. It's not a question of whether these tools will become available, because many of them actually are becoming available. What unifies these technologies is that the power of big data and artificial intelligence. So that smart tractor I talked about doesn't treat all parts of a field in the same way. It can distinguish between the sandy, well-drained bits and the swampy bits and respond accordingly. Similarly, that robotic milker doesn't treat an entire herd the same way, but will treat each cow. Much like personalized medicine is transforming healthcare, the tools of artificial intelligence and big data, automatic tractors, robotic milkers, these are things are allowing our farmers to become far more precise with their inputs and essentially manage the needs of animals and plants in real time. This presents huge opportunities, but it also presents some significant challenges, and in particular, labor requirements are likely to change drastically away from manual labor, migrant labor, low-skilled labor, and increasingly, the farm and food entrepreneur of the future will need to be a data manager, an app developer, a coder. So, this is something the municipalities have to address. My final point is to draw attention to this contradiction. On one side of the coin, these technologies, the impulse towards greater globalization, are going to lead to an increase in global trade in food. And notwithstanding the entrenchment towards nationalism south of the border, there's huge opportunities for us, specifically in the Asia-Pacific. If we can develop the means to demonstrate that our food is safe and sustainable and nutritious, we will be rewarded by an increased market share. Simultaneously, however, and I'm sure everybody in this room is aware of this, there's an impulse towards the local, the 100-mile diet in the farmer's market, the artisanal, the real. This impulse towards buying smaller quantities of higher value food that are produced with certain guarantees about sustainability or locality, these are trends that will shape the future as well. So at the same time as we're expanding our global reach to our export markets, we will also be enriching our local food systems. This is a tension, again, that I think the municipalities are going to have to help us address. So let me conclude very briefly with some thoughts on specifically what sort of policies or activities we can do at the local level. First, I believe we all have to realize that the ag food sector is a sector of the economy full of growth potential and opportunity and innovation. The future of agriculture in many ways does not look like the past. And so communicating to young people that a career in ag food means much more than just being a traditional farmer is really important. And so I'm delighted at the University of Guelph to be leading a program where we're giving out $2 million a year in scholarships to grad students to train the next generation of agricultural entrepreneurs. And we're about to announce a major award program for ag innovation. But we also have to work to develop the infrastructure to support this. High-tech, data-driven farming and food processing won't come easily. Rural broadband and connectivity are absolutely necessary, providing opportunities for entrepreneurs to set up vertical farms in our cities, working with the regulatory frameworks around novel proteins such as insects or fungus, these sort of things that are new entrants in the market but can become mainstream. Also, the municipalities, I think, need to work with people like me, universities and colleges, so that we develop those programs of study to prepare emerging workers for the opportunities in this space. So taken together, the challenge of feeding the world's growing population while dealing with climate change and water scarcity and things like that is enormous. This challenge is the kind of challenge that defines a generation. But within the challenge, I think we have this extraordinary opportunity that Canadians and Canadian communities are really uniquely poised to help take advantage of. And realizing this opportunity has already been recognized by the federal government earlier this year. And I think it's up to us and you folks in particular to make sure that that aspiration and that ambition, that opportunity is brought down so that all levels of society can help benefit. Thank you very much.